Hey guys, it's Graham, and this is a 5-in-1 comic book review. Because of the schedule in December with Christmas and the way the Wednesdays lined up, I've had some sparse weeks, and then this week I got 5 books. So I organized them by the one that I was perhaps the least excited to read, and then ended with the one that I was most excited for. So let's jump right in. We are on Void Rivals number 15, I think. And this is a series that continues to be relevant for the overall Energon universe from Skybound. But it's got so many threads going now that there's a lot to keep track of. And I feel like the last 2 or 3 issues have just tried to check in with every one of these characters that they're following. And outside of one or two of them, a lot of the stories have been stagnant. So we check in with Dirac, who in the last issue he met up with Hot Rod out in space. So we're getting more Transformers in this story. And now he brings Hot Rod back to his side of the Sacred Ring and introduces Hot Rod to his father. And then Hot Rod meets up with Springer. So now we're seeing two Transformers talk to each other. Salila continues her descent into the deep void of whatever it is that she's looking for, and she comes to a conclusion of some sort there. I'm going to avoid spoilers here. And then we get one random little visit from Skuxoid as he collides with the Cobra characters that we were introduced to an issue or two ago. The Quintessons make a brief appearance. So there's just all this random stuff going on. I've got the impression that if I were to go back and read this whole series 5 or 6 issues at a time, I might get a better grip on what the overall arc is supposed to be. But for now, it's just a little bit scattered. I'm not disenjoying it. I'm having a fine time with it, but that's largely due to understanding that it is a piece of a bigger puzzle in the Energon universe, and that I'm reading it for completion. It's not drudgery. It's one that I pick up, and my response to it is usually like, "Oh, cool. It's Void Rivals. Fine." I'm on the cusp of whatever whenever I see a new Void Rivals pop up. But Hot Rod is one of my favorite Autobots, so I'm curious to see what role he plays in this overall story. The next one that I read was Absolute Wonder Woman number 3. And while I really liked issue 1, I felt that issue 2 slammed on the brakes. And we get a flashback to Diana growing up in hell with Cersei, with her adoptive mother. And then one day Steve Trevor wanders in there. And then she also meets Steve Trevor again in the present, in the city that she's in. She's trying to defend from like the legions of hell that are invading and attacking. Now, one of my concerns with this Absolute Wonder Woman was that Kelly Thompson was the writer, and she wrote that Scarlet series for Skybound, which was not good. And there were some aesthetic similarities between her Wonder Woman and her Scarlet. Now, the Absolute Wonder Woman is an alternate take on Wonder Woman. It's supposed to be, but I was wary of it being her, but I was optimistic because of how good Absolute Batman was. You guys know the story at this point. I am very pleased to report that issue 3 was not only a return to form like issue 1, but it was just very, very well done on its own. There's some new monster that popped up and is attacking the city, and it's called the Tetracide. And Diana explains, like she hinted at the end of the last issue, that this thing was going to kill everyone, including her. Well, she goes to explain in this issue what Tetracide means. It's the 4 deaths. And she explains like what those are in succession, and it's basically breaking down the tactics of how this monster kills and what her only hopes might be for defeating it. One of the similarities between this take on Wonder Woman and Kelly Thompson's take on Scarlet was that she randomly has all these tattoos, or maybe it was Jinx at this point, all up and down her arm, which is a huge problem for somebody who regularly goes undercover and does covert operations in slinky dresses and stuff. Like it's a very dead giveaway as to who you are. You know, these bad guys that you're fighting aren't going to know 5 different women who all have the same tattoo on their arm, you know? Well, without spoiling anything, we get an explanation as to why she's got that sleeve tattoo all up and down her right arm. And it also explains why we randomly had this aside in this flashback and with Steve Trevor in issue 2. It's actually all connected, and man, this book was a lot more mechanical in explaining the world that this absolute Wonder Woman lives in, and what ramifications that has for the story. But it also wasn't just some info dump and like, well, this is this and that is that. Like, it was a seamless marriage, we'll say, of mechanical explanation and character motivation all put together. Like, I was very, very pleased reading this one. Just a page or two in, it's like, oh, okay, she's doing something with this. That's kind of the hazard of the issue by issue format with comics is if you were to read all 5 of them in succession, you'd understand that you're reading all of one story. But there are times when what's going on in the overall story can just kind of slow down for a single issue. And you'll read 1 month's issue and you'll just be like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, I'm not going to crave going back to this one particular issue so that I can remember what's going on. Like, the action and the driving forces for the story are more present in other issues. But knowing that now, after having collected comics monthly for over a year at this point, like, I know to be a little bit more patient when this goes on. And there was a big payoff here on Absolute Wonder Woman number 3. After that, I had 3 Ghost Machine titles in a row that all released at once. There was Hornsby and Halo, number 2. That's the story of a child from heaven and a child from hell sent to Earth disguised as humans with their memories sort of blocked. And it's this, not only this afterlife truce, but also a nurture versus nature experiment. They put the celestial kid with bad parents and the infernal kid with good parents to see if how they were raised can counteract their what's the word that I'm looking for? Their inherent nature. And man, the writing on this one is so good because it's not just setting up that pitch. There's also a through line of a story that gets developed in the first issue that then bleeds over into this second one. And now you're starting to meet some of the peripheral characters who are there, we'll say, kind of as wardens for this experiment. You meet a guy who's there who's kind of keeping an eye on Zachary Halo, the angel kid being raised by bad parents. And then you also meet some, they call them firewalkers, some infernals that are there to interact with the demon girl, Rose Hornsby, who's being raised by good parents. This is a really good take on this idea. I've read a couple of different stories that are like, we'll say, biblical fantasy fiction set in the modern day, but not necessarily centered on biblical stories. It's just we're dealing with generic Christian ideas with angels and demons and developing it from there. Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett is probably the best known example of this. The Mercury series by Rob Cruzy is the best executed version of this. And now this Hornsby and Halo, 2 issues into what I assume is going to be a 5 or 6 issue arc, is, well, in 2 issues, it's showing us a really good version of this same idea, a great exploration of it. The art is beautiful, storytelling is really good, and I'm just, it feels so good to be vindicated, like trying something new and it's good. I feel like there's been less of that in the last several years. And as I said, that's from Ghost Machine, but that is not from Jeff Johns. I want to say the writer on that one is Peter Tomasi. Speaking of Jeff Johns, though, we've got Redcoat number 8 and Geiger number 9. Maybe, yeah, I think that's the breakdown. Redcoat issues 1 through 7, were about him meeting a very young Albert Einstein and dealing with the nefarious doings of Benedict Arnold and stuff in the late 1800s. And then you flash forward to the 1950s and he meets Albert Einstein again as an old man. Simon Pure, he's this Redcoat immortal who is now kind of doomed to just walk around eternally and try to find a justification for his existence. We've seen him go through a character arc in that first overall story. Well, now this issue here, issue number 8, it feels like an in-between one-off story, but it's very well executed. And it actually got me looking up something that I'd heard of before but didn't know a whole lot about. In this one-off story, It's the 1870s in Kansas. So we're getting into the homesteader era. People are expanding. People are sticking up farms out here on the Great Plains, and there are often travelers coming through and lodging with people wherever they can find a spare room. Well, there's this one family named the Benders who, whenever travelers come by to stay with them, they kill them and steal their stuff, and they're serial killers. And I thought, Bender, why does that name sound familiar? In the beginning of the story, they kill a random passerby, and then in the next part of the story, Simon Pure walks through. He's the immortal. Now, he can die, but he constantly resurrects. So he can suffer, he can feel pain, but he'll eventually he'll get better. And so we see this one random guy get killed, so we can see what the Bender's method looks like. There's mother, father, son, and daughter, and the son and daughter are adults. Anyway, they kill off this one traveler, and then they kill Simon Pure, and they throw him in the basement with the other bodies, but then Simon Pure resurrects, and he pops up, and he kills the Benders. That name sounded so familiar, so I looked it up. This story is based on actual serial killers from the 1870s in Kansas. They were called the Bloody Benders, and they were credited for killing at least 11 people in the way depicted in this comic. But the reason it sounded familiar to me was that there was an episode of Supernatural back in season 1 that operated in a very similar manner. They met up with this family named the Benders, and it was a bit of a curveball because Sam and Dean, the brothers, they were used to hunting vampires and werewolves and vengeful spirits and stuff like that. In this case, it was a shocker, but they were just fighting regular people, and the family surname was Bender. They were similar serial killers. So I'm going to assume that the writers of that episode were drawing on this other event in American frontier history from the 1870s, but that's why the name sounded familiar. So I like these historical tie-in type comics, and since in real life, like the Benders were known to have like A, killed all these people, and then B, just vanished and disappeared. The explanation in the comic is that they tried to kill Simon Pure, and he killed him back. So justice was done in that sense, that their victims were avenged, and for the continuity of the story, that's how it happened. So it's a little bit of a breather issue in between other arcs. The big tease coming at the end is that now Simon Pure is going to team up with Johnny Appleseed, and we're going to see what that's all about. There's been some talk of a seed from a tree from the last adventure, and so I feel like we're going to get into the next big multi-issue arc with Redcoat. And then with Geiger, it's hard to give too much here without recapping a larger part of his arc, but basically at the end of the previous issue, he met up with a new small town of people to hide out in, but he's being hunted by villains going all the way back to like the very first issues of Geiger. There's a resolution there, and then there's a tease for other characters. At the very end, we get a very quick glimpse of, you know what, I'm not going to say who, but I will say that it's one character from the Unknown War that we've seen before, and then another character that has been hinted at that we don't know a whole lot about. If you've seen the timeline for the Unknown War, there are like 3 characters that have been revealed and gotten their own books, and then there are several that have been teased or named but not elaborated on. And one of them, we finally get a look at him. Like you can see, oh, okay, this is what they're doing for that particular character. So no spoilers there. Geiger continues to be excellent. There were some parts of this story that felt redundant. They were treading familiar ground, but in the end, it did develop the overall arc, and we're progressing towards something different. And now we're starting to tie some threads together between the figures in this Unknown War. So a great week for my pull list. Void Rivals was fine, and then all of the other ones were anywhere between like satisfying to very, very good. So check these out. Man, I'm really enjoying the process of going to the comic shop every week and just having something new to enjoy. And it's great on a week like this to be really rewarded with not just 5 issues, but numerous issues that were very, very enjoyable. it is a Christmas miracle. So thanks for watching. Drive safe. See you out there.